I've seen various figures online point out how ancient Romans and Greeks viewed Jews negatively, and how this not only proves something about the past, but also confirms something about the present. Various right wing X accounts will post such statements to imply that Jews have always been uniquely evil, and that even the non Christian ancients knew this. I would like to not only look at some of these quotes in context and compare them to how the same or similar figures viewed other groups, notably Christians, but other pagan groups as well, but also look at some positive quotes that can be found about Jews from ancient sources as well. Author Lewis H. Feldman of the book Jew and Gentile in the Ancient World, for example, remarks that of Menahem Stern's three-volume work, Greek and Latin authors on Jews and Judaism, 18% of the comments by pagans are favorable, 59% more or less neutral, and 23% unfavorable. Obviously not an exact science with some subjectivity, but I'm going to accept unless one wants to read all through Stern's three volumes for oneself. Many of the criticisms the ancients had about Jews may even be seen today as quite odd, especially in the West, where the worldview has been shaped by the Bible and biblical ethics. One such example is Titus's account of the siege of Jerusalem, in which he remarks with some disdain the Jewish eagerness to have children and their refusal to kill unwanted children. Infanticide was a common practice in ancient Roman life, but Jews and later on Christians abhorred the practice. Many other criticisms of Jews are also pretty contextual to the ancient world and don't really seem applicable today by any stretch. Various writers called out the Jewish refusal to worship other gods as unpatriotic, such as Appian, who was later argued against by Josephus in his work Against Appian. In fact, a lot of the writings we have on ancient Jews from the time period come from either responses to criticisms from people like Josephus and Philo or early church fathers. Circumcision, Sabbath keeping, prohibition of pork are other facets of Jewish life that were criticized, but presumably many right-wing Christians today, even those who LARP as such, can't really criticize things that they supposedly believe God commanded at one point in time, even if are not to be held onto in the contemporary period. Also, who doesn't like the weekend? Ironically, one criticism that may still be applicable today, at least for religious Jews, is the accusation of being clannish and a refusal to intermarry, although that is hardly the case for secular Jews, and the whole Maccabean story and many others in the Bible show that the Jews were apt to Hellenize and imbibe things/join other cultures quite willingly. Also in Tacitus's account of the siege of Jerusalem, he describes the Jews as being unwilling to sleep with women of other cultures, while remarking upon their supposed lasciviousness, nonetheless. So much for Jews being the rootless cosmopolitans on the lookout for any shiksas that may come their way. Perhaps ardent nationalists can learn a thing or two from them. Along with criticisms that many wish to highlight, of course, the Jews garnered praise as well. Moses is praised by some Greek writers like Numenius, a Neo-Pythagorean, having remarked, "What is Plato but Moses speaking in Attic Greek?" Jewish connections to antiquity were also praised frequently and can be seen in the works of writers like Julius Solinus, Claudius Iolus, and even Pliny the Elder. It is even said by Antonius Diogenes in Porphyry's Vita Pythagorea that the esteemed philosopher had visited the Egyptians, Arabs, Chaldeans, and Hebrews for wisdom regarding the art of dream interpretation, and that Pythagoras' condemnation of use of images, cited in Diogenes Laertius' Lives of the Philosophers, was ascribed to Jewish influence. Many other statements that seem to connect Jewish practices and beliefs with those of ancient Greeks are remarked upon in Josephus Against Appian. Clearly, Josephus wanted to make the Jews look good, obviously, so I'm sure a bit of bias there, but when dealing with any historical source, biases abound. Even the modern notion of Jews being smart seems to have some ancient corollaries, with Seneca the Younger remarking that Jews know the reasons for their rites, while most other peoples go through a ritual not knowing why they do so, and the historian Eupolemus declared Moses as the first wise man. Both of these sources can be found in Feldman's book, but similarly, the quotes are from Augustine and Clement of Alexandria, ergo the issue of bias can come in, as these church fathers would have wanted to extol the virtues of at least Moses and some Jews vis-a-vis the foundation of their own Christian faith. Without having a prominent background in either Neoplatonism or Judaism for that matter, I may also add that Platonic ideas of the One and the biblical idea of monotheism may have some commonality, or at least jive more than the rudimentary stories of the pantheon of Greek gods, that even some ancients thought of as no more than just stories invented by men. See Xenophanes, for example, and see Russell Gmerkin's book, Plato and the Creation of the Hebrew Bible, for comparisons between the two. Even the fact of conversion and the existence of the so-called God-fearers proves that at least some ancients were so enamored by the Jews that they sought to become part of them or at least officially ally with them in some way. The Christian New Testament alludes to these individuals in the book of Acts, for example, where Paul preached in synagogues to both children of the stock of Abraham and whosoever among you feareth God, Acts 13:26, and more verses here. Archaeological evidence, such as the inscriptions at the ancient site of Aphrodisias in modern-day Turkey, show members of the local Jewish community, as well as local God-fearers, who either attended or donated to the local synagogue in the community. Feldman remarks that there was a separate delineation between God-fearers and proselytes, i.e. those who were in the process of conversion, which we will discuss now. Modern Judaism seems to not be a proselytizing religion today, although conversions are more or less mainstream, from those converting for marriage in a Reform synagogue symbolically to the more hardline conversions of conservative and Orthodox congregations, but ancient Judaism seems to have been somewhat different. Indeed, the book of Ruth is about a woman who more or less converted to Judaism. Your people will be my people and your God my God. Ruth 1:16. Although obviously these terms may be anachronistic in comparing modern conversion practices to an ancient story, but you get the gist. Also, the Talmud talks about converts, including ancestors of the famous Rabbi Akiva, and even gives a story, obviously fictional, of the Emperor Nero converting to Judaism. Post-destruction of the Second Temple, conversions were rare, and there has been debate as to whether or not seeking out converts was taboo or not, but evidence suggests that it was still an ongoing thing for some centuries. Many of the evidence of this are actually from early Christian writers such as Justin Martyr in his dialogue with Trypho, speaking of circumcision of proselytes, and various laws banning the conversion to Judaism in the Roman Empire, from Septimius Severus to the Theodosian codes, the former dealing more with pagan converts and the latter dealing with Christian ones. Apparently, some Christians did indeed convert to Judaism, such as a certain Dominus, according to Eusebius in his church history, and John Chrysostom had to admonish his congregation many times not to fall into Judaizing heresies, and to stop visiting synagogues so much. Although this may not have been conversion per se, the appeal to Judaism or Jews or synagogues was evident. Regardless of the exact details, it's pretty clear that while plenty of people had negative views of Jews, plenty also had positive ones, which drew them either to conversion or close to it. As always, I will make comparisons to other groups, and this write-up will be no exception. I always find it a little bizarre that so many of the people who lambast Jews for being hated/persecuted over the centuries turn out to be Christian, or at least LARP as such. Considering the history of persecution that their religious antecedents went through, especially in the Roman world. While some of the history of this persecution may have been exaggerated, no one can deny that Christians faced the ire of the Romans in word and in deed, just as the Jews did on various occasions. Doesn't help unmuddy the waters, considering that Christianity began just as a Jewish offshoot, but I digress. Many early Christian writings were written as defense and apologetics against pagan writers and thinkers who were at odds with the burgeoning faith. Celsus, whom Origen made a rebuttal to in his Contra Celsum, where we still have a record of his views, made various statements against the Christians as being seditious for not engaging in Roman civic life. One can see the same theme in the Christian writer Minucius Work Octavius, which has a pagan Roman remarking on the Christians' failure to understand their civic duty, specifically for not engaging in the Roman imperial cult, which Jews incidentally had an exemption from. Tacitus, in his Annals, remarking on the fire of Rome, describes Nero's prescribing blame on the local Christians, whom he calls Christians, and while not necessarily endorsing the view that the Christians were to blame, did call them out as a class hated for their abominations, and their religion as a superstition. Both Pliny the Younger and Suetonius shared this view of Christians being superstitious, and more than likely reflected the view that the society at large thought about the movement, seeing anything so new as suspect. We even see writers such as Justin Martyr and Tertullian responding to accusations of cannibalism, more than likely a confusion on the part of those who did not understand the Eucharistic ritual, but all this to say the new Christian community certainly did not have an easy time, or was looked on positively any more than the Jews at the very least. When it comes to non-Jewish, non-Christian Europeans and others that the ancient Romans and Greeks encountered, they were largely labeled as barbarians and were simultaneously praised for the good and bad qualities that they were perceived to have by people like Tacitus in his Germania about the Germans, remarking on their warlike culture but at the same time their laziness and drunkenness, or Cicero's On the Consular Provinces 31 through 35, where he regards the Gauls as savage, barbarian, and warlike. Obviously, these writers are biased and are part of an empire that sought to dominate these groups, but a good source for showing the contempt Romans had of the other. A later writer, Ammianus Marcellinus, describes the Huns, not exactly European, but still an outgroup that the Romans encountered, as basically inhuman in appearance and morality. Although pagan religion can generally be thought of as more tolerant than Abrahamic ones, this religious pluralism only went so far, with many examples of criticizing and even outright banning certain religions. Livy describes the Bacchic cult of Dionysus and how it was banned in 186 BC for involving murderous and sexual conspiracies that were undermining civic and social life. To what extent Livy can be trusted on this is debatable, but the law was definitely passed banning it. The emperors Tiberius and Claudius effectively banned the Druidic religion in Gaul due to its use of human sacrifice and dislike of Roman rule. Lastly, along with Christianity, Manichaeism was heavily persecuted under Emperor Diocletian, with the religion being outlawed in 302 CE. All this to say, of course, the Romans and Greeks criticize people not like them. Everyone does, and negativity rises to the top of people's consciousness, much like today, which can be seen on any Twitter thread or YouTube comment section. The problem with looking at the ancients as any kind of arbiter on which group is bad or good is that they were pretty equal opportunity haters. Jew, Christian, pagan, etc., nobody was beyond the pale to criticize for the Romans and Greeks. They even had hate for each other. To use the ancients in such a way will basically just backfire on anyone who tries to use this odd tactic of hating on Jews, and one does not need to read books like Dominion by Tom Holland to even understand that the ancient world is very alien to us moderns. Regardless, one should learn from them, of course, but also take what they say with a grain or two of salt.